Hello, this is the webinar Easy Landscape Maintenance, Making Gardening Enjoyable Again, and I'm Dede. I work at the Utah State University Botanical Center as the garden manager and landscape designer, and graduated in landscape architecture and environmental planning from Utah State University, and I love gardening. I love garden design. I love everything about it, and my philosophy here at work, I have 100 acres and not a whole lot of staff, so my philosophy is to be able to enjoy our jobs, we need to work smarter and not harder. And I think this really translates to the homeowner. You guys want to get out there. You don't want to be working out in your yard every Saturday all day long and not have time to enjoy it with friends and family. To be able to kind of wrap our heads around how we can have a really good landscape maintenance program, we kind of need to go back and figure out why we like the things that we like. We have a lot of English heritage with our gardens planting. We like the big expanses of lawn. We like these big geometric shapes and shrubs, rectangles and circles, ovals, and this all for our climate in Utah is really high maintenance. We don't have the annual rainfall to keep up the lawns as much as they do in England, and we don't have, the time to go out and be trimming our hedges every Saturday. And this translates into our everyday landscape to look like something like this, which, from the curb, it's great. You've got great curb appeal, but this is going to be a lot of work, and where I want you to get out and be enjoying your yards. This is exactly what we shouldn't be doing. Most of these landscapes, and I see them all the time, are done with boxwoods like these in here that are, you have to be clipping them constantly. They're not very well adapted to our area. So a lot of times, I'll see people plant this little line of boxwoods and then one of them will die. And then the whole thing looks bad because you have a little hole in it. So you have to replant this one, but then it never grows back at the same rate. So it looks off, and that's a lot of work. Where we're trying to lower the amount of work that you guys are doing. This is really high maintenance. And then, you look at the shapes of these, they're all in little circles and triangles and rectangles, and that's just not, it's very English, it's not natural, it's very manicured, and that's all going to be requiring more work. So, if you take this, and the aesthetics, you want to keep that curb appeal, but you do it in a Utah adapted version, it'll look something like this. Really pretty. You got your pinks, your purples, some yellow, some dark green and light green. It all comes together really well. And this, you're going to be cutting back each one of these maybe once a year. So when you look at this, the constant cutting back, the constant hedging, the constant, you're going to be putting chemicals on this so they don't go yellow because of our high alkaline soils. This is a lot more low maintenance. And like I said, my rule of thumb is if I have to cut it back more than once a year, I'm not going to plant it. It's just going to be too much work, and that includes shrubs. This can translate to a residential sense with something like our Utah house in here. Look really great on elevation. The curb appeal is fantastic. You got your colors going on with your greens in the grasses and the yellows in the grasses, and that's another thing you have to keep in mind. A lot of times with that English mindset, we're thinking, oh, I need big blooms and blossoms, this and that. And in Utah, we've got to get our color occasionally from different things. Ornamental grasses, leaf foliage color works fantastic, and the composition comes together really well. But that being said, a landscape like this is kind of like training a puppy. When you begin training a puppy, it's a ton of work, but once you get the puppy trained, it's a lot easier. And that's kind of what this is. If you got this established, you'd be working maybe 3 hours a week on Saturdays to get this, kept up. But once you got it maintained, and we'll go through the steps so you can keep them maintained, it's going to be so much less work in the long run. Think if you just planted all of this with turf. With your Kentucky bluegrass, you're going to be mowing it maybe 1 to 2 hours a week. And that's going to be constant over the life of the landscape. If you got this planted like it is originally and worked 3 to 4 hours a week on Saturdays, and then over time let the plants fill in, work on that maintenance regime, then maybe half an hour a week. An hour a week, you'd be out there taking care of the little things, and it'd be a lot less work in the long run. So like I said, it's like training a puppy. And my number one rule with The maintenance in this sense is let the plants win the war. It's all about competition, and healthy plants fight a lot better. So when with that in mind, you kind of need to look at your site and decide your priorities. You can't be doing everything everywhere. So you need to kind of say, where do I want things to look best and for who and when. So maybe in a site like this, say this was kind of a site that you were looking at, I would personally come out here and say, well, this is where cars will be driving in, this is where all my friends and visitors will come, my family. I want this to look good. I really want the front of the house to look pretty nice. And I also, out these back windows, I can see all of this, so I want this to look nice too. And then obviously I'm going to be spending time mowing the turf because maybe I have a lot of friends and family that come over and play sports. And so I want this to be a large area, but I want, to do a low water turf, and we're going to mow it, once every week. So these are your high priority areas. This leaves all the rest of this out here in low priority. So when I say low priority, I mean we're just not going to leave it alone. We're going to plant stuff that's going to establish itself. It's going to maintain itself on its own. So native shrubs, native grasses, we're going to plant up on here because it's a slope. That's going to be hard to maintain anyways. And then in here, we're just going to do maybe a low water shrubs and stuff, and then a no-mow turf. I'm not going to mow it. We're going to mound it up. It's just going to flop over on itself. It's a little bit more informal looking, but that's fine because I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to worry about what people see here and what I see back here, and then where I can play. That's where I'm going to spend my time and my work. So once you can prioritize your high priority, your low priority areas, then you need to do a quick site analysis. You need to figure out your soils, drainage, wildlife, slope, sun exposure, all of those things, because if you can't keep your plants healthy, then they're not going to be winning the war for you. So maybe we look at the soils in this area where I want to do a really nice planting and they're all compacted. If I plant my little higher maintenance plants in here, they're not going to do very well. So I need to remediate that before I get the plants in. Maybe back here in the back there's a wet spot where it drains off this mountainside and just kind of pools here. So before I plant that, I'm going to need to make sure I'm going to do something that can handle wet roots. Or I'm going to be planting trees again and again and again. It's going to be a lot of work. Maybe I also need to look at wildlife. Maybe there's a lot of mice and voles coming off this hill that's going to be, damaging these plants here. So I'm just going to keep that in mind. The slope here, it's going to be really hot. We already knew that. We talked about it in the first slide. So we're going to need to have something that's low water, that's tough. And then in here as well, one might want to look at slope if this comes down, or shade. We've got a lot of sun exposure in here. If we plant a Kentucky bluegrass under a lot of shade, it's not going to do very well, and it's not going to compete, and then our weeds will come in. So that quick site analysis will help inform you of the stuff that's going on so you can keep your plants healthy. So along with that, plant selection is a huge chunk of the battle. If you have a plant that you know what space it needs, then you're not going to be trimming, you're not going to be hedging, and that's this picture on the right. If they would have thought of this park strip size before they planted the tree, they wouldn't need to be doing root pruning, and I'm sure the sidewalk has been replaced various times. That's a lot of work in itself. You also want to, like I keep saying, get away from that lollipop mentality. Let plants be their own shape. If you can at all avoid it, don't be trimming things back into little squares or little circles. That's just too much work. And in all honesty, once you get out of that mindset, things look so much better. That being said, you need to make sure you find shrubs for the right size. You also need to make sure they're adaptable. So here's just a quick little list of things you should avoid. The Anthony Water Spirea, the Autumn Blaze Maple, dwarf burning bush. I might get some bullets because of that, because there are some really popular plants in the nurseries around here, but they really get iron chlorosis really bad, and that's what this is showing right here. Take, for example, this Autumn Blaze Maple. Our soils are so alkaline that it makes them impossible to absorb the iron in the soil, so they become iron deficient, and that's the same with these other two as well. So after a while, they start to turn yellow, they don't ever green up, and people ask me all the time, Dede, what do? It looks so pretty in the fall, but I can't ever get it to green up. And I mean, you can use iron chelates and other chemicals, but it's going to be constant, it's going to be expensive, it's going to be a lot of work in the long run. It's not something that you put on once and you're done. You're trying to adapt the soil pH, and it's just not possible. So it's going to be constant maintenance over time. So if you plan ahead and avoid these plants, then in the long run there'll be less work. Sun requirements we talked about a little bit in that slide with the site analysis. Say, and this is not the best picture ever, but say you have that Kentucky bluegrass in a really shady spot and it's just not establishing. You're going to get other things coming in. You're going to get dandelions, you're going to get clover, and there are low sun turfs. So that's just stuff before you look at it, you know, well, if it's shady here, I'm not going to do Kentucky bluegrass because it won't compete. You can see all this dead space behind the bench. You're going to get that, and that's weed territory right there. Water requirements are huge, especially where we live in the second driest state in the nation. We overwater everything. And I'd say of all the plant pictures that people bring in to say, what did I do wrong? It's overwatering almost every time. So just be careful, read up on your plants, know what you have, and know what they need as far as water. And if you can at all, avoid planting trees in your lawn. This happens so much. And if it's not the water that gets them, it'll be, you know, an edger or a line trimmer that comes and gets that trunk and ruins it, or a lawnmower comes along. So really, it's just bad practice and high maintenance. Again, it's going to be more work in the long run because you're going to have to be planting new things or figuring out how to keep that tree alive. It's just more work than it's worth. So watch your water requirements. So we'll get into talking about weeds. What is a weed? Weeds are opportunistic, competitive. They usually have an abundance of seeds, and then multiple means of dispersal of that seed, an extended dormancy, and they're usually, well, almost always, damaging either aesthetically, definitely, financially sometimes, physically, or ecologically. So 3-step weed control. First, you need to know what you're dealing with. You need to be able to identify what kind of weed it is. Know your plant, know its life cycle, plant and the plant biology behind it, which we'll go through. It's really not as complicated as it sounds. And then you need to know your control options. Should I pull it? Should I do this? Or should I use chemical? You need to know what the best way is to fight the battle better. And then how to use those treatments. So you can use chemicals, pre-emergents, post-emergents, and know the dangers. We'll walk through each of these real quick. So the weed characteristics, just like your plants that you get at the nursery, they come in 2 forms: perennials, which come back year after year, and annuals, which die with the winter coming in. So the perennials, you need to really worry about germinating seeds, well, with both of them, because they'll reproduce through seeds. You need to prevent those. And in perennials, you'll get vegetative regrowth, which means, you know, if you pull off the top, then they'll keep growing and growing, and then they'll come back every year. And with that, they'll have an energy storage. And so that's when, like, the root stays in the ground. I need to get that root out. And then perennials are always a long-term project. Well, weeds are a long-term project in general, but they're more of a long-term, and we'll talk about why in just a little bit. And then annuals. So annuals, like I said, they'll come back. They'll die in the winter, and then they'll reseed in the spring, and then they'll come back. So germinating seeds is definitely the number 1 on that list for maintenance. And then you need to look at what time of year it is. You know, is it in the fall or in the spring that they come on? And then healthy plants, again, will make a huge difference in competition with annuals. So watering and cultural practices. So don't worry, again, this may sound complicated, but there's an app for that. So you can go to your App Store or your Google Play and download Common Weeds of the Yard and Garden. It's a little app that we have here at Extension. And you can look by picture, which is usually what I do if I don't, you know, I know what it looks like, but I don't know the name of it. So I'll go search by image, and then you can find it, and it'll tell you it's a perennial, this is how it's treated. So this is a really good, because we can't go over every single weed that we deal with here in this webinar, but this will help you kind of know who your enemy is and how to deal with it. So let's get through the different ways you can control. Mechanical control is obviously just getting the weed out of the ground physically. So you can do that by tilling. The only problem with that is sometimes you can bring weed seeds to the surface, and that's a little detrimental. Hoeing, again, it's high maintenance every 10 to 14 days, and digging. This is what we're trying to avoid, if at all possible. Sometimes you'll have to, like I said, that puppy training, you're going to have to dig up a few, you're going to have to till a few maybe, or hoe, but we're going to try and minimize this area. This is where we really want to narrow the margin. And then, so with that, when I talked about plants being your number one weapon against the weed war, this is where we get into cultural control. So plants need light, soil, and nutrients, right? And some weed plants need less of those. But if we can get rid of light, soil, and nutrients, those weed seeds are not going to be able to outcompete as well. So with light, we can get rid of the light on the soil of the surface with a mulch. Usually I recommend more or less 3 inches deep, and that's going to keep the weed seed not only from getting light if it's on the surface of the soil, it's also going to separate that seed from the soil so it can't get its, can't germinate in that. And then a lot of people all the time, they ask me, should I do landscape fabric underneath my mulch? And I usually recommend that they don't. And that's from my standpoint. I'm usually putting in plants, taking out plants, and the landscape fabric, if you want to put something in a space and you haven't opened a hole in it, you're going to have to cut a hole in it. It's just a lot of work, and I don't feel like it does a whole lot better than the mulch itself. I mean, it's just getting light off the soil. It's a barrier between the surface and the soil for that weed. I think it works just as good as the landscape fabric. And then tight plant cover will block that sunlight to the soil, like in this picture. Not a whole lot of weeds, and in all honesty, I don't spend a lot of time weeding this garden because those plants are competing very well. You can see down here, we've got shadow on the soil, those little seeds aren't getting the sunlight they need to germinate, really enhances that competition. And I know sometimes with the low water ideology, we think, well, less is going to save me more water. And that is true to some extent, but with these low water plants, I water it maybe once every 2 weeks in the summer when it gets real hot, once a week. And they do fine, and I use less chemicals, I use less pre-emergents because those plants are doing the work for me. Okay, now we're going to talk about chemical control and pesticides or herbicides. Number one rule, always read the label. You always want to do it, even if you know what you're working with. You always want to glance at the label, make sure you know what you have in your hand, and you know the risks that go along with it. So pre-emergent is going to target mainly annuals, those things that will die out in the winter and come back in their season because they reproduce through seeds. They'll set seeds in the fall and they'll come back in the spring. So primary target there is annuals. It's really good for established areas. You need to wait, once you plant your actual plants, you need to wait 3 to 4 weeks to apply pre-emergent, so you want to make sure it's already established. You need to put it down before the weeds emerge. If you've already got weeds, this is not going to be your best weapon against the war on weeds. It's going to kill the little seedlings of the weed seeds that come in, and it makes a soil barrier. So what you're going to do is if it's liquid or granular, you'll apply it. If it's granular, you're going to want to make sure it gets a little water, kind of like a fertilizer it's going to go on. And then it'll make a little soil barrier. So you're going to want to do it after you do an initial weeding. That way, when you go back through to apply it, you're done. You don't need to step on it, because the more you step on it, the more you're going to break that soil barrier. You set like a little sealant on the top almost. And you need to realize it's not a cure-all. It's going to help you a lot, but you'll still need to be out there maintaining it. Like I said, it's like a puppy. And you'll find this product under trade names including Treflan and Preen. I'm sure you've heard of them. They're great. So just so you can realize the impact, 1 year of seeds equals 7 years of weeds. They really last for a long time, and If you look at the different seeds or weeds that we have in our areas, you can look over and see, okay, red root pigweed, those seeds will last 2 to 4 years, not a big deal. If you get all the way down to bindweed, which a lot of people call morning glory, those seeds can last 40 to 50 years. So pre-emergent is a big deal. You can really cut down on some of these costs, especially if you've got them in your soil, you've got them there. If you have that pre-emergent, it's going to keep them from germinating, and you won't even have the problem to begin with. And then there's post-emergent. Our primary target is perennials, so things that have that established root, that energy stored in their little roots. You're going to use that after your weeds emerge. You have selective and non-selective, and we'll go into those in the next slide. Temperature variability, so you need to make sure you're reading the label, you know what temperature you need to be spraying at. Drift can be a factor, which is why I put in this picture, because he's spraying where he's spraying, but then it's blowing all away. And then some plants are sensitive to certain chemicals, and some plants have immunity to certain chemicals. We'll go over that. So being able to use chemicals is kind of based on the weed classification. So we have annuals and perennials, which we've gone over, but we also have dicots and monocots. So dicots, broadleaves, like this dandelion, they're little, if you look at the leaves, they'll have little net veins, and then usually they have really coarse taproots. And then monocots, like grasses, have parallel veins and fibrous roots. So pretty much, if you can't remember, just broadleaf and then grasses, dicots and monocots. So 2,4-D is the most common one that I use. I'll go through 2 chemicals really that I use and that I think will be fine for residential areas. This 2,4-D is a broadleaf weed killer. So a lot of people use it on their lawns to kill dandelions. Won't kill your lawn, won't hurt it. The big classifier here is that you need to use it under 85 degrees. If it goes over 85 degrees and you're spraying this, what will happen is it will volatilize, it will turn into fumes and be just as poisonous. So everything it will hit in its wake will die, but you won't see it because it'll be fumes. So just be really careful you don't spray over 85. And it's really good, like I said, for lawns, ornamental grass gardens, fantastic. People ask me all the time, how can I make it a little more low maintenance? And I always say ornamental grasses. Just plant ornamental grasses. You can spray this broadleaf weed killer, it won't hurt them, and then you don't ever really have to weed because the chemical is killing it all and it's selective. And then another thing to keep in mind is if you do hit a plant that you want on accident, it absorbs through the green growth. So if you say you hit a leaf on a tree, you're just going to cut off where that leaf is, and your tree will be saved. I always spray with a pair of clippers just to prevent that friendly fire. And this is what it looks like if you've hit something, and this is a weed, so it's okay. That 2,4-D damage will curl the leaves. Oh, and I just wanted to reiterate again here, above 85 degrees will volatilize. If you see trees in your neighborhood curling in, means your neighbor sprayed with 2,4-D above that 85 degrees, and you can just go out knocking on doors and find that person. No, don't go look for that. That's okay. The non-selective herbicide usually is glyphosate, and some trade names are Roundup and Kills All. I'm sure you've all heard of Roundup, and it kills everything. Everything. As you can see in this picture, someone was probably thinking that they were spraying with a broadleaf weed killer, but they actually had this glyphosate that kills everything. You can see their little footprints. Recommended for perennial weeds that store their energy in their systems, like morning glory or bindweed. And again, just like 2,4-D, it's absorbed through those green growths, those leaves. And then if you get it in the soil, say you've got your little nozzle and your sprayer and you stick it in the dirt and it's got that soil on it, it's gonna deactivate. It kind of deactivates when it hits the soil. And then some weeds like mallow are resistant, so you'll need to be using, and that's a broadleaf weed, so you'll need to be using 2,4-D on that one. And then you've got the trade names there. We've talked about that. So we'll just go over a few weeds really quick that you might have problems with. The 5 most common. Dandelion, people are always asking me about, and usually if you have dandelions, your landscape maintenance program is pretty weak because they are super susceptible to both 2,4-D and the glyphosate. Even a little drop, they'll kill them right right off. And like I said, great to spray that 2,4-D on your lawn to get those out of your lawn. It does have a strong taproot though, so if all possible, I'd avoid pulling these. I avoid pulling any weed, because if you can use good practice, then you shouldn't be having to, break your back bending over. And with this one, you're going to be pulling out the top, and that taproot's going to stick in the soil and it's going to grow back. So your best bet here is a weed killer, that glyphosate or the Roundup, or the 2,4-D. Field bindweed, here it is again, morning glory. With this one, you just have to remember it's a continual fight. With the dandelions, you're going to get them pretty easy. This one, people have told me the only way to fix it is to move. And that's not necessarily true. You can treat it, but it'll be a constant battle. Your roots can run up to 20 feet long, and like we went through on that previous slide, the seed viability can be up to 50 years. So your best bet with killing this morning glory is Roundup or 2,4-D, glyphosate or 2,4-D, or just pulling those stems mechanically. If you pull them or spray and then spray them, eventually your plants will establish and compete a little bit better, but it's just a constant battle, and you will win it if you're diligent like that. Like I said, with the puppy, if you're going to train your puppy, you're just going to keep on top of it, spray it, and that with that spray too, it'll go down and kill the roots off more and more. But with 20 feet of roots, it's going to be more than one application. And if you do have it in, say you've got it in a garden bed, kind of like this, maybe not onions, but you've got it growing up in your plants and you want to keep your plants alive, but you want to spray it, what you can do is get a latex glove. Make sure it's a really high quality latex glove, and then put a cotton glove on top of that and dip the cotton glove in a glyphosate concentrate and just brush it onto the leaves, because like I said, it's going to absorb through those leaves, and it won't hurt anything else as long as it stays on the leaves of that morning glory. You can also do it with a paintbrush if that's easier, but that's usually pretty good way to kill selectively. So just make sure you're only getting on that. I've heard of people even pulling out the little stems and sticking them in a jar full of the concentrate too. If you wanna do that, that's great. Spotted spurge is another one that we see a lot around here in this little picture. It is an annual, so you're going to want to use a pre-emergent. They love heat, so the absence of light will keep those little seeds from germinating. One little plant can throw out about 1,000 seeds. So pre-emergents are huge on this one, and then they don't compete very well, so if you do have a healthy lawn, that's your number one. Healthy plants, like I said, they're your number one weapon. So keep your lawn healthy. If you mow at a high lawn height, your lawn's going to be a lot healthier. And if you keep it regularly watered, that infrequent and deep watering, it'll be healthy enough to compete with the spurge. Crabgrass, you're just going to want to make sure to use pre-emergent as well. It is an annual, so if they're little, pull them when they're little. When they're bigger, it's not going to do you a whole lot of good with those little rhizomatous roots in there. If you do get it in your lawn to a point where you just can't pull it or do anything, you're going to need to spray it out with Roundup and then reseed. So yeah, it's a little bit of a battle with the crabgrass because you can't use a selective weed killer because you're going to kill everything with the Roundup, but it's your best bet on that one. So just in closing, as a summary of everything we've talked about today, first of all, to maintain your landscape easier, you need to plan for it. You need to figure out where your high and low priorities are. Then you need to make sure your plants are healthy. And then you need to outsmart your weeds. Hope this has been helpful, and I hope you guys have a great time gardening.